There we go. And Victoria, you should be able to share your screen. If I can hand over to you, just to
Mhm.
say we are delighted to welcome you. Working with refugees and asylum seekers is a new area of work for ourselves. And it's something that we're desperately keen to learn more about, really, here at work of the Jesuit Refugee Service and how these values are lived out in action. So Victoria, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, I think I'm sharing my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Grand. Okay, wonderful. So hi, my name is Victoria. I'm the Senior Communications and Engagement Officer at the Jesuit Refugee Service UK. Today, as Mark said, I'll be talking to you a little bit about the work that we do and kind of how it's very much rooted in principles of Catholic social teaching. Um, as I'm as I'm talking, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. I might not be so good at monitoring them as we go along, but I can get to them at the end if there are any. And I'm also contactable after the presentation as well. Um, so I just want to start off by stressing that our faith actually has a very, very long and rich tradition of working with migrants, exiles, and refugees. So this is a quote here from Exo Familia Nazarethana. Apologies for my poor pronunciation, but it's a document from 1952 written by Pope Pius the 12th. And in this document, he really reaffirms the Catholic Church's commitment to caring for migrants, exiles, and refugees. Um, like I say, the tradition is rich. Even in scripture, even from the very beginning of scripture, we read stories in the Bible of forced migration. For example, in the books of Genesis, we see multiple generations of the same family who experience some form of involuntary and forced migration, whether it is persecution or fleeing from famine, for example. In the book of Ruth, we see actually an incredible story of two migrant women who come to be accepted by their new host community. And I think this is very striking. In Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the more legal books of the Bible, we we have a lot of laws actually telling us to love the stranger. Someone once told me, I haven't counted this myself, and if you know any better, feel free to tell me. But somebody once told me that the Bible actually says to love the stranger, the widow, and the orphan more times than it does recite the old famous commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Um, and then, of course, we have the Holy Family's flight to Egypt when Jesus is a baby. Um, Beyond scripture, there's a rich body of social teaching in the form of encyclicals, church teachings, papal messages. And actually, at the end of this week, the last Sunday of September every year, the church celebrates World Day of Migrants and Refugees. Um, this is not a thing that lots of people have heard about, but every year Pope Francis puts out a message, and churches, parishes are all encouraged to think about what they can do to walk with migrants and refugees. Lots of the social teaching that we have kind of arose out of the church thinking about the welfare of Catholics as they moved about the world, whether it was Italians, for example, or Irish people. And over time, it kind of came to, to encompass a care for all people who move, irrespective of faith. Um, in 2018, Pope Francis asked us to build upon that long history using four verbs: welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. So welcoming means offering more options for migrants and refugees. Excuse me. Protecting is about upholding the rights and dignity of migrants and refugees independent of their legal status, which I think is very poignant for us here in the UK. Promoting, so empowering people to achieve their potential as human beings, and integrating, so providing people the opportunities for intercultural enrichment, recognizing the gifts that people bring to our societies and the contribution that they can make. Last year, the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales produced a document called Love the Stranger. I'm not sure how many of you will have read it, but I hope you have. And if you haven't, I think you can find it on their website. And some parishes, I think, have access to some print copies. So I'm not going to do a whole deep dive into the document today, but I do really recommend reading it. I just wanted to draw out two of the themes that Love the Stranger touches upon. It's the right to flourish at home and also the right to move. So sometimes I go into spaces and people think that the Jesuit Refugee Service are calling for open borders and no asylum system, and this people understandably struggle with. From experience, I want to specify that this is not what we are calling for, but what we are calling for is a fair and humane asylum system where people are welcomed with love, and we are really listening to people and making sure we are doing right by people who come here seeking safety. And this has a real grounding in church teaching. So the second chapter of Love the Stranger is about the right not to migrate or the right to flourish in your own homeland. It rightly recognizes that many people who are forced to move would not do so if they had the means to stay safely and securely. So the point is, no one wants to be a refugee. People do not choose to have to leave their home in fear for their lives. So the document recognizes that countries have a responsibility to look after their own citizens, to look after, whether that's making sure there's economic and political stability, for example. And other countries have a responsibility as well to help other countries make this a reality. So we all have a responsibility to cry out against things that force people from their homes, whether it is climate change, poverty, injustice, and persecution, for example. And of course, there are lots of other amazing organizations who do this kind of work. So Jesuit Missions, part of the Jesuit family, do a lot of this work abroad. So if you'd be interested in learning more, I'm sure they have fantastic resources on their website. So whilst we do this, while we cry out against injustices pushing people from their homes, we also need to recognize that until substantial progress has been made in achieving a space where people can flourish at home, we are obliged to respect the right of people to move. So chapter 3 of Love the Stranger focuses on the right of people to migrate, and it doesn't actually just limit this to refugees who are fleeing persecution, but I won't touch upon that today, so I'll direct you towards the document. So I work for the Jesuit Refugee Service. We are present in 50 odd countries around the world, and the work that we do in each country depends on needs that aren't being met elsewhere. So in the UK, for example, we work with destitute asylum seekers who have no recourse to public funds. That is, they have no government support, whether it's economically or with housing, for example. Then in other parts of the world, colleagues will be working in refugee camps, in war zones, maybe in education or teaching people new skills if they're in a protracted refugee situation. So they're displaced for a long time and they need to learn new things to support themselves. What kind of underpins all of this and brings it into our one mission is a shared mission of accompanying, serving, and advocating with and for refugees. Accompaniment might seem a slightly strange word to highlight within our mission, but it is very much the foundation on which the rest of our work sits upon. It's a driving force for everything that we do. And we have this real sense of walking alongside people, recognizing that they are made in the image of God, and and that they are a human person with dignity and someone to really value and to really love. So during this presentation, I may use at times the term refugee friend, and this is kind of rooted in that idea of accompaniment and of human dignity. The refugee sector is very stretched, and when organizations are trying to help people, they can kind of be like, okay, right, attend to this need, tick, 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 stamp, next. And you can understand why it happens. People are trying to make do with what they have. At JRS, we try very hard not to just do this. So we tend to people's material needs, but we also try and make sure to take the time to get to know people. whether it is over a cup of tea or some of our amazing volunteers. And we try and come to know each other as friends. So if I use the term refugee friend, that is where it's coming from. We're recognizing that people have a favorite football team or love dancing, or I don't know, they do or don't like spicy food, for example. So the Jesuit Refugee Service was founded in 1980 by the then head of the Jesuits, Father Pedro Rupe, who's that man on the screen just there. The Jesuit Refugee Service was born out of concern for people who were fleeing Vietnam at the time. So on the 14th of November, he said, St. Ignatius called us to go anywhere we are most needed for the greater service of God. The spiritual as well as material need of nearly 16 million refugees throughout the world today could scarcely be greater. So he was talking at a time where there are 16 million refugees, and now there are a lot more than that. Sorry, that number is a bit old. I think it's more like 123 million now, forcibly displaced people around the world. So like I said, we work with refugees and asylum seekers who are forced into destitution and poverty. They have no government support. And we work with them as they await recognition as a refugee. And I'll come to the concrete services that we offer later in the presentation. But the people we work with are often waiting 10 to 20 years for refugee status, during which time they don't have the right to rent anywhere to live. They don't have the right to work. You don't have the right to own a bank account. So any money that you are able to get, you can't really keep securely to look after yourself. You don't have access to education, and there's limited healthcare as well. So I want to give some context to our situation here in the UK today. Currently, I believe the total number of asylum seekers and refugees, so that is people who both have recognized refugee status and people who are still waiting to be recognized as a refugee. The total number of people comes to 0.6% of the population. So we hear an incredible amount in the news about refugees and asylum seekers, but actually they're a very small proportion of new people coming into the country, as well as like the people in the country as a whole. So I think sometimes maybe when we're watching the news, it might be worth thinking about, why are we hearing about this so disproportionately compared to the number of people who are actually here? The most common countries of origin of people coming to the UK are Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. It's worth bearing in mind that I think it's around 80% of refugees around the world are actually living in low to middle income countries. So the majority of people are not coming to the UK. And 72% of refugees are actually hosted in neighboring countries, so the countries next door to them. This might be for a mixture of reasons. People might want to be able to return home and have easier access, once it's safe to do so. They might want to be somewhere where they understand the language or the culture in order to reestablish their lives. Fleeing for your lives is very disjointed. People don't really have much choice. And if you're fleeing somewhere, I wonder what are the things you would think about. You'd probably think about going somewhere where you had the best chance of setting up your life again whilst waiting to be able to go home. And resources are also are a constraint. Lots of people who are forced to move aren't able to go further than the neighboring countries to where they're from. And of course, it's important to remember that lots of people are internally displaced within their own countries of origin, which means that they are displaced, they have been forced from their homes, but they still remain in the country where they are. They might have moved to another region. And of course, around the world, there are lots of people who are also what academics call involuntarily immobile. So people who are living through hardship, are persecuted, but because of a variety of factors, often because of means, they are not able to go elsewhere. But all of this is to stress that we hear a lot in the news about everyone is coming here, and we can't take it, we're inundated. But actually, the UK, we don't have that many people. In Europe, based on the number of applications per head of population, we receive the 20th highest number of applications. So it is not up there. A lot of you may have heard about the Illegal Migration Act last year, and also before that, the Nationality and Borders Act. Lots of these legislations and other policies effectively are punishing people seeking asylum for how they choose to come to the UK. When in fact, in the UK, there are no safe routes for the majority of people. So if you are, for example, from Hong Kong, there's a visa scheme, temporary pathways for people from Ukraine. There are some resettlement schemes for people from Afghanistan, for example, but that doesn't always work because actually lots of people coming through on small boats are from Afghanistan as well. So unless you are one of the few people who are lucky enough to qualify for one of these few schemes, and you're lucky enough that the scheme actually works, there are no safe routes for claiming asylum in the UK. So when you come to the UK and claim asylum, you go through a number of interviews and different screening bits where the Home Office determine whether you do have a need for protection. The majority of asylum claims are granted protection at the initial decision stage. And then from there, people receive refugee status, and over time, they're able to start working and renting and building up their lives again. It's not always straightforward, however. Recent policy changes have meant that actually lots of people, once they receive refugee status, so once they are legally allowed to rent, actually end up street homeless for a bit because they are made to leave their accommodation very shortly, and there's a long wait before they can access social housing. And of course, before then, they haven't been allowed to work, they haven't been allowed to have a bank account, so it's not like people can have a safety net to find somewhere to live before once they receive their refugee status. So some people are initially refused refugee status, but lots of this is overturned on appeal, and the number of negative asylum decisions that have been appealed, so later they've been recognized as refugees, this has been steadily increasing over the last decade. This is for many reasons. So people might later have a positive decision, that is, they are recognized as needing protection later on, for a number of reasons. The quality of decision making can often be poor, with many refugees having to rely on courts to award protection instead of people trained by the Home Office. The appeals process is complex and lengthy, and often people seeking asylum have to wait months and months for their appeals to be heard. Part of this is there's been lots of reports showing kind of a lack of training within the Home Office, and productivity of Home Office workers making decisions on people's claims hasn't recovered since COVID. So there's some sort of equation that the Home Office used to kind of work out their efficiency. And I think the last number from May this year was a ratio of 1.66. Whereas before COVID, I think in March 2020, that rate was 2. So we haven't quite recovered from that. I would ask you all to stick up your hand if you've heard of the hostile environment, but I can't see any of your faces. So I'm going to trust that some of you have heard of it. The hostile environment is kind of a web of policy and measures designed to make life purposefully unlivable for people seeking asylum in the UK. It was originally called the hostile environment by the government, but that's since been rebranded to the compliant environment. But hostile is definitely an accurate depiction. So, like I said, we work with people who don't receive support from the government. The people we work with have had negative decisions on their asylum claims, and we work with them as they put in a fresh claim and move towards having refugee status. And for most people living through this, they're living in a culture of disbelief with no right to work, minimal or no support, the risk of indefinite detention. During this time, people are really isolated, they're pushed to the margins. And for some people, they might experience double marginalization. For example, if you are a woman living on the streets, things might be harder, or if you have special needs, you don't always get the support that you need. So common things that people experience are destitution. So people don't have any economic support, and it can be really hard accessing food. Food, a place to stay, warm drinks, clothing, that sort of thing. Earlier this year, we worked with another food charity called Sustain to do a report on asylum seekers' access to food. And the picture that we heard was really sad. And people, would go to food banks, for example, and be given expired food. So, a charity saying, oh, yes, we're responding to people's physical needs, but we're not responding in a way that recognizes someone's human dignity and the right to have something good to eat. People also struggle with homelessness. The majority of people that we work with at some point or other will have experienced street homelessness or sofa surfing. And this can lead to very precarious living situations, and people can be really vulnerable. For example, if you're sofa surfing, we've spoken to lots of people who kind of have been at the mercy of the people who are giving them somewhere safe to stay. Or you might be forced out during the day, so you can only return home at night. And we also work with people who sometimes sleep on night buses. So they'll get on a bus at night at the start of the route and stay on the whole route, hope it's a long bus, and get off at the end so that they have somewhere safe and warm to stay. If you'd like to know more about the particular challenges around homelessness, we released a report earlier this month called Destitute and in Danger, and that looks at the experiences of people made homeless by the asylum system. And we also work with people who live in immigration detention. So immigration detention, it looks like a prison, essentially. You can see that picture there. And often detention centers are run by the same people who run our prisons. But detention is ostensibly for the purpose of administering immigration procedures. So people seeking asylum can be brought to detention while waiting for a decision on their claim. However, the decision to send somebody to detention never goes before a judge, despite looking like a prison. And also, we are the only country in Europe which has no time limit on detention. Finding access to legal support, to welfare support in detention is incredibly difficult. And in the work of the Jesuit Refugee Service UK, we've spoken to lots of people, and even survivors of torture, who have likened detention to being tortured again. So the people we work with often feel this real loss of identity, this loss of dignity, and people are really pushed to the margins and feel isolation. This is a poem written by one of our refugee friends, and I wanted to share it with you because it probably speaks more to the experience than I could in my own words. So our friend says, "Limbo is a waste of time, discrimination, a state of nowhere, a person who has lost their dignity, the destruction of life, drowning but not dying, a dark night with no stars or moon, only the sound of frogs, feeling cold and sleeping badly, waiting for a miracle, to have your future and status. What an experience. So at JRS, we try and respond in an integrated and holistic way to the challenges our refugee friends face. And we work with them in order to make sure that our services are responding to the needs that people do have. So we try and co-produce our services, as it were, making sure we're regularly workshopping the work that we're doing consultations, so that refugee friends are truly designing the process with us. And our work covers a mixture of accommodation, legal support, destitution and advice casework, outreach into those detention centres, and policy and advocacy work. So I invite you to think about how much you spend every 2 weeks. So on traveling somewhere, on maybe getting a cup of coffee if you're like me and you have a terrible cold and you're sniffling, or you know, on, I don't know, maybe having a cake if you, I don't know, have had a rough day and you just want a comfort snack. And that's kind of like before you get to any of the necessities you have to buy. And I wonder whether £20 would cover it for 2 weeks. So £20 isn't a lot, but it's what we're able to give. So every 2 weeks rather, we give £20 hardship grants to our refugee friends. And this has to cover things like their travel, doing laundry, buying medicines, all of that before getting a comfort hot chocolate, for example. Our practical support also includes food, toiletries, and clothes. So people can come to our centre in East London and pick up things that they need once a month. We call it the JRS shop. People aren't paying us, but the idea is people can pick and choose the items that they want, rather than being assigned a pre-packaged parcel. Here you go. We want people to be able to choose the things that suit their dietary needs, their religious needs, and also just be things that they like. Alongside this, we provide things like phone credit so people can stay in touch with loved ones and with lawyers, with caseworkers. And all Home Office applications have to be done online. So actually having access to the internet and being able to be connected is essential for people being able to move forward with their asylum claim, as well as have a support network around them. We also provide legal support, destitution casework, and accommodation support. So depending on people's needs, we're able to meet them and help them progress their asylum claim. The accommodation support is incredibly essential. If any of you are in London or know anyone in London and have a spare room, JRS has a hosting program where people with a spare room, whether you are a religious community, a family who have a spare room, or maybe you're a part of a church which has a spare room in the presbytery, people take in refugee friends for short-term placements in order to keep people off the streets, and give people a safe place to stay while they're working on their asylum claim. Imagine having to try and keep all your paperwork with you, all your belongings with you while you are homeless and trying to keep on top of the complexities of the legal system. In addition to this hosting program, we also have 2 houses that we run for refugee men and refugee women. And these have been facilitated and supported by religious communities who have either donated properties or help with the running costs of the project. And in these houses, people can stay for up to a year. So it's a bit of a longer term situation, whereas our hosting program is short term. We also provide community building opportunities. So We have activities at our centre and also dotted around. We do field trips as well, for people to come to get to know other people and build a support network with other people going through the same things as they are. And the idea is also that since people are waiting for 10 to 20 years for asylum often, we want to give people something to take their mind off of things. To only be thinking about the progress of your claim for 10 to 20 years is incredibly difficult. And we want to make sure that people feel like a whole human person and like they have other things that they're able to do. In these activities, people also learn wonderful new skills. So we have a new sewing group at our centre, for example. There are cooking classes, English classes. So it's something new that people are able to feel proud of for skills that they've acquired, and also maybe skills for the CV one day when, God willing, they get their refugee status and are able to move into work. At our centre, like I said, we also want to make sure that people can come in and just be. They can have a cup of tea with us. They can talk about things that are on their mind, things that they enjoy. And this is especially important as the weather gets colder. So some of the people we work with might have a place to stay in a shelter, but during the day might be asked to leave and have nowhere to go. And as the weather gets colder, you want somewhere safe and warm to stay. We also have wonderful befriending programs so people can get to speak to someone. And these are wonderful two-way relationships, which really embody our value of accompaniment. We're also increasingly running community projects where we work with communities dotted around London and also in the northwest of England. We're starting to open up a project in Merseyside where we work with local communities on other projects. So maybe it's litter picking or gardening, trying to bring together refugee friends and neighbours within the community so people can get to know each other, and hopefully stop some of that misinformation that a lot of us hear on the news and that can really divide societies. We also have an outreach service into immigration detention centres. Here we're not providing legal advice because the rules of who can provide legal advice into detention are quite strict, but we are able to help people find emotional and pastoral support through staff and social visits, and we're also able to help people get access to things they need, maybe if it's access to a GP or medication, for example. And of course, we work in advocacy and outreach. So we're advocating for changes in the asylum system. Like I said, we're advocating for a humane asylum system where all people's refugee claims are heard on the merits of them needing protection. We try and raise awareness of what's going on in the asylum system so that people know what the reality is that people are living through. So in this work, we try and live out the principles of Catholic social teaching. These are just some of them, but there are a lot more, obviously, that we try and touch upon. And I think lots of these chime with the Vincentian values, which I think are kindness, dignity, compassion, choice, and justice. But if I've looked at the wrong page, forgive me. So, for example, we live out the principle of human dignity by focusing on accompaniment and the whole human person. So working with our refugee friends to attend to both their spiritual and their material needs, and getting to know people. The universal destination of goods. So concerns about controlling or limiting immigration should never be allowed to shape asylum policy. If an asylum system is about granting protection to people who need protection, then why is so much of the debate about numbers? The common good, so we place a focus on protection for people who need it, and recognizing, like I said, that the church really recognizes that people do have the right to move in order to seek a better life. And we also live out solidarity, advocating with and for refugees, enabling people to be agents of their own redemption. So in lots of our communications, we really try and champion the refugee voice. So people with lived experience write for our blogs, they write for our newsletters, and we have a group called Refugees Call for Change who also work with our team and submit evidence to government inquiries, for example, or work with us on our reports so that we can make sure more people know about the reality of the asylum system in the UK. And these are just like a few examples of different times people have been able to have a platform to talk to others. So one of the pictures there is where refugees working with other JRS officers got to speak at the Vatican at one of the events held for the Synod last year, which was really incredible. It was packed in Peter Square, and they got to talk to people, and people were able to listen to real firsthand experiences of seeking asylum. People write for our newsletter, and people also perform at poetry workshops in the centre of London. And again, what really underpins all this is a spirit of accompaniment and encounter. So these are quotes from people actually who have hosted refugee friends, which is a particularly intense way, I think, of living out that spirit of accompaniment and encounter, because you are literally living alongside people. So in case the text isn't very clear on the picture, this host has said, "You realize a lot about yourself. A bit of disruption to the norm is always good. You break habits and gain perspective. Hosting a guest is witnessing to our belief that we are all sisters and brothers in one big human family. It's enriching as we learn about each other's cultures. We have also learnt how to make each other laugh, to share about ourselves, and to be present when needed." So a better system is possible, and what we're advocating for our better alternatives. So we do need an asylum system, and we do need rules in place, but we can do this with human dignity as a starting point. So this includes, for example, creating more safe routes for people to get here and claim asylum. People should not be forced to undertake dangerous journeys. Giving people access to legal support so they can properly navigate the system. So many of the people we accompany at JRS UK are in this position simply because they didn't have the right advice or representation in the first place. We also want to make sure that the interview system is not purposefully hostile. We've worked with people who have been refused sometimes on the basis of getting a date wrong about their journey over to the UK, and have felt like they were purposefully being tricked during their interviews. We could also give people the right to work while their claims are being processed so that they can contribute to their skills and better support themselves. We're advocating for an end to immigration detention and instead to accommodate people within the community. There have been pilot projects run over the last few years where instead of people being put in immigration detention, people have been given accommodation within communities, so also not out of town hotels. And actually there's a much higher compliance rate there with asylum rules, and it's been a lot more efficient in terms of getting outcomes, so actually making decisions on asylum claims. So of course, accommodation in the community is less expensive and also a lot more humane, and helps to create that culture of encounter that Pope Francis speaks about, and also that our host spoke about on the last slide. And we also need to urgently improve training for people working in the system so that anyone seeking sanctuary does get a fair hearing. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of these asks and the main things we are calling for, there's some more information in our autumn newsletter. You can see the URL there on the screen. And I can also make sure that Mark has these links as well after the presentation in case people would like to read it later. So I really hope that I don't know, I've been able to paint a bit of a picture of the things that our refugee friends are living through and just how tough the asylum system is. And I do encourage you, if you can, to try and do something to walk with refugees, especially as we approach World Day of Migrants and Refugees this weekend. So it might be that you want to volunteer. Maybe it's by hosting, befriending, doing a parish appeal. Like I said earlier, for example, we would love to give more than £20 hardship grants every fortnight, but it is what we can afford. So if we are able to get into more parishes and speak to people and raise more money, then we're able to continue offering support and hopefully increase that support. So if you'd be interested in helping with any of those things, please let us know. Pray with and for refugees. We have some prayer resources on our websites, but just keeping us in your prayers is wonderful. And maybe encourage your parish priest this weekend to make sure that there's an intercession for refugees and people on the move this World Day of Migrants and Refugees. Learn more. So we regularly publish reports on the asylum system. This year we've already produced 3. So one with another food charity on accessing food, one on immigration detention, and one on refugee homelessness. But we also do webinars. We regularly publish responses to the news and commentary on the news on our website and on our social media. If you'd like to challenge yourself and fundraise, you could run the London Marathon with us next year in April, or tell other people to. And talk to others. So host a meeting in your community and talk to people about the realities of the asylum system. And I'd be really interested in learning what resources would be useful to you in doing this. So if there's any information that JRS can provide for you all, yeah, please let us know, because we really want people to be having these conversations. And of course, you can donate physical items. We always need things like dry foods, warm coats, sleeping bags, and toiletries. And please keep learning more. So like I say, we regularly produce reports and we run webinars, online sessions. We send out email updates every 2 weeks about things that are going on. We produce a postal newsletter, which goes out once every 3 months, and the next one will be in December. And these, again, are kind of more in-depth stories from our refugee friends or reflections on policy, and it's like a real holistic example of what people are living through. So I think now we've got some time for questions and discussion. So I'll leave that on the screen. And if people have any questions, Mark, I'll let you manage the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for a fantastic insight into the work of JRS and the brilliant work that's taking place there as well. It's genuinely inspiring to hear about what's going on, and for a field that we're keen to make sure we can add our voice to. There's a reassurance, I think, in seeing the focus on the person in what can be a very dehumanizing system and process. I will open up to questions to the group now. We've actually had a early question on from Sister Franca, which I'll go to first, which was just saying that when you talk around a lack of training in or from the Home Office, what kind of training are you thinking about there? So what training do you think would be beneficial? Oh, you're on mute there, sorry.
Sorry, I was blowing my nose and forgot to unmute myself. My apologies. Got a cold. I've come up to Scotland and my body hasn't adjusted well. So I mentioned earlier reports showing kind of a lack of training, and some of these reports have shown that actually lots of people haven't actually even completed the training required to make a decision on asylum claims. So making sure that yeah, this is done. So people are completing the training in the first place in order to be able to make decisions. The Refugee Council last year also published a set of recommendations, which I do really encourage you to look at, showing also that if there's better training on kind of like the top 5 countries where people are coming from, and decisions could be made faster on that basis, that we would save millions and millions of pounds every year. So being able to respond to those faster would mean, more time being available for trickier decisions that need to be made. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's quite frightening as well to hear.
Yes.
It's really quite concerning, but certainly a key issue to be campaigning on. I'm happy to open up now to questions from the wider group. If you could pop your hand up, or whether physically or on the little tool on Zoom. So while we're doing that, I suppose I would.
Mark, there are a couple in the chat box.
Second.
Oh, there's a question about racism, and yes, that's completely right. It should have been in my hostile environment web. I suppose something to think about is how different responses have been to people coming from different parts of the world. So we might think about how we were wonderfully able to set up this fantastic system for people coming over from Ukraine, but we haven't quite necessarily managed it elsewhere. And also, actually, lots of the legislation set in place to create a hostile environment for refugees also has knock-on effects for other people living in the UK. So, for example, I said that people seeking asylum do not have the right to rent. Lots of this kind of came about through 2 acts, the Immigration Act of 2014 and the Immigration Act of 2016, which puts forth lots of this right to rent legislation, which not only bans people seeking asylum from having the right to rent, but also makes it a criminal offense for landlords to rent to someone who does not have the right to stay in the UK. And as a result, after those policies were introduced, lots of research found that actually people who had the right to be in the UK, who had the right to rent in the UK, were struggling to find access to accommodation because maybe they had a name that did not sound stereotypically British, because they weren't white, and landlords were scared of being put in jail, of being fined for renting to the wrong people. And this had a knock-on effect on a wider group of people as well.
Mr. Allen.
Victoria, thank you very much for your presentation, full of interesting information. I've got 2 questions. The first one is probably just a simple answer, but we have, because we're an integrated province among the daughters with Australia, we have several Australian sisters with us today. I was just wondering if there is a JRS in Australia. They probably know this already. And you know how obviously the information today has been very UK based, but I'm sort of wondering how if JRS actually makes international links, and if you know if that would be of any help to our sisters in Australia, or if any of them want to say anything.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if anyone wanted to come in first from Australia, or I'll just. So we do work across countries. So in the UK, probably the offices we work with most closely are in Europe. We do a lot of work with JRS Europe, as well, especially across detention. There is a JRS Australia, and they do fantastic work. So I can find the link and I'll put it in the chat. Some parts of the world kind of work more practically on responses together, especially where maybe conflict goes across borders. So, for example, lots of the JRS Middle East and North Africa offices, for example, will work together on joint responses to crises. here in the UK, I guess because we're our own little island, we mostly just work in the UK, but we try and do that greater policy response with colleagues in Europe.
And I see Deborah's unmuted, so she might just want to comment.
Yeah, we certainly do have Jesuit Refugee Service in Australia. How our government responds to refugees, I think, would probably even be more harsh than the government of the UK. If you come to Australia by any means other than through the refugee camps overseas, if you come on a boat or a plane or whatever, you will never, ever get residency in Australia. So, you know, that's, you talked about a certain percentage will get it. Well, you don't get that at all. So people are held in detention for many, many, many years while the cases go on and on and on. People have been sent back, particularly to countries like Sri Lanka, and have been killed. And the Edmund Rice Foundation, which is around the Christian Brothers, have done some research on how many people were sent back saying that they couldn't go back because they'd be killed, in fact, have been killed. So, you know, it is quite striking and shocking, really. So, yeah, our homelessness services have some connections with Jesuit Refugee Services because people do cross our doors.
Thanks, Deborah. I just was conscious of the sort of mixture in the audience. My other question, Victoria, really was about partnerships. Coming back to the UK, because you didn't talk about working with any other agencies, either in the advocacy or in practical terms, because some of us are involved in a lot of other services that could be useful to link with. And also we have personnel that could be useful to be volunteers and so on. But the partnership side of JRS doesn't seem to be strong.
Forgive me, that's my own error. No, we work with a lot of other organizations. So for example, our advice and destitution casework team often work with other organizations to make sure that people get access to GP help, to English language courses, to accommodation shelters, for example. We work with other charities who help to source and donate food to us that people can pick up. We work with other organizations who lead on our music classes, for example, or lead gym sessions in the local area, so that people we work with can have a healthier life. So we do work with lots of people. If any of you are working with another charity and think that you'd be able to offer some support to us, that would be amazing. And of course, we also, produce research and reports with other charities as well. We do work with quite a niche group of people at a specific point in the asylum system, as do many other charities, because we're trying to make sure that, that people aren't falling into a legal limbo where they're unable to access help. Yeah. Does that answer the question a bit?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
I'm mindful there may be many more questions. Oh, I'm also very mindful of time. So Christine, you got your hand in just before I was about to say we'll draw to a close. Christine, you're on mute there. Can you just unmute yourself? Sorry, Christine.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah, what a magnificent job you're doing. And it's so good to know that asylum seekers are not as described in the press, if you like, and have a service. But may I ask how you recruit your volunteers?
How we recruit our volunteers? So whenever we have kind of like a concrete position that we need filled, we put that on the volunteer page of our website so people can check that out and see and get in touch if they're able to do something. So right now, for example, I think we're looking for volunteers to teach other people to sew, for volunteers to assist refugees, and volunteers to visit people in immigration detention. But we also know that people have lots of wonderful gifts. So we do ask that if people have something they feel they can give to JRS, just to email us and get in touch and let us know. And that's lots of the ways that we've started up our music programs, for example, our English classes. People have approached us and said, I have these skills, could I help? And that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a follow-up very quickly, and I'm sorry if it's been answered already. Where do you signpost undocumented people who are illegal, basically?
So we work with people to put in fresh claims. So the people we work with have already kind of been through the asylum system, as it were. You know, they've gone through the government process to be recognized as refugees, and we help people to put in fresh claims and to progress forward with getting refugee status. So we only work with people who have already gone through the asylum system, as it were, but we work with lots of other charities who are at different points of the asylum system. So if someone maybe has just arrived and they're looking to start their asylum claim, we'd work with other organizations to do that.
Sadly, I do think we're going to have to draw to a close now as we pass 11 o'clock. If there are further questions, I'm sure, Victoria, if we can hopefully in touch with another, we've got the link here where you've got the presentation on the JRS website. So thank you for sharing that. I really just want to thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today, and also for the work that you're doing, which is desperately needed. Fantastic to see. And you're absolutely right with the values you saw as ours around serving people experiencing the effects of poverty, choice, compassion, justice. The work that you're doing there is exemplifying these values in practice, and we're incredibly grateful that you work you do. And hopefully, if we can find a way to work in partnership more closely as we look to develop in this area in the future, it would be brilliant too. So just thank you yourself and all your colleagues and all the volunteers at JRS.
Thank you very much. Apologies for my sniffly nose today. And yeah, if you need anything, my email is in the chat. I'm very happy for people to get in touch. And I will pass on people's love and hellos. And oh, hello, hi, Sister Liz. So yes, thank you very much for having me.
Well, honestly, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today as well. It's a reminder that we are back again 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. A change of focus. We are looking at housing and homelessness tomorrow. We're very fortunate to have Alexia Murphy, who's the Chief Exec of DePaul UK, who will be raising the issue of housing and homelessness and how that is currently being responded to, and also where plans are for going forwards, how we can address what is a very growing problem. So just a huge thank you for joining us. Thank you to Victoria. And I hopefully will see you all 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.